Thanks very much for the kind introduction and also for the invitation to speak. Very much thank you to Guobao and Bridge for inviting me and talking a little bit about this. And I think we're continuing quite nicely, going from open source software that Chris has so nicely summarized different efforts with, to PET data sharing and open data. And I think as many of us have seen by now already, there is the fact that data sharing is not a choice anymore. Actually, I would say even more, as we've just stated it by together with Russ Poldrack in a nice little commentary, data sharing is moving from a choice to
Melanie,
actually.
just 1 second. The slides just went dark. Sorry about that.
Okay, no
One
worries.
moment.
At least for me, it looks like I'm sharing.
Oh, okay, you're back. Thanks. Go ahead.
There we go. So as I was just saying, so I don't think that data sharing is unfortunately a choice anymore. We just recapped this in a little commentary here together with Russ Poldrack, and it's actually becoming more an expectation. It's an expectation by the funding agency, but also by the governments that ultimately fund us, but also by the research community. But at the same time, it actually requires these big community efforts to make the data sharing easy for individual researchers, but also ensure that the data that we share can be reused and is not just dumped someplace. And I think actually in PET, we are on a really good track, because PET is, as we know, so much more than clinical scans, and we can visualize and quantitatively measure all kinds of functional biological processes. And already back in 2007, the PET field was at the place where we arrived at a consensus nomenclature. And we continued this way by the guidelines paper that was published back in 2020, where a bunch of experts, I'm sure many of the people in the room were also involved, were actually involved in writing up what should be inside a paper when we publish our PET studies. What should be the guidelines? What should we report on? All the way from the reconstructions to, of course, with the radiochemistry already included, to the image analysis, both the pre-processing, but also what any kind of models are being used before we finally do our statistics. So here we actually had quite a good ground to build on in order to move forward and talk about how we can share data. And there, the brain imaging data structure, or BIDS, came into play. And just to be sure, for the people that don't know it, it's a data structure, but not a format. So it's not some new nifty format or DICOM format, but it's actually a way of structuring in a folder structure, and with certain metadata attached to it, your actual imaging files. So it's more about how to organize your data, how to name your files, how to document these important metadata that, especially in PET, we have loads of. And the most important thing, it uses community standards. And we were so lucky in PET that we made a version of PET BIDS. It was community derived, started in around 2016, 2017. I got involved in the fall of 2017, and it was finalized in 2021 and also published last year. So in that sense, we have some very good ground to stand on. We have basically our nomenclature there. We know what we need to report in papers, and principally, and now we also have a data standard. And with this data standard, we have, of course, gone into a lot of details. We know that the most important thing when we're doing PET imaging is the time. So we, of course, designed the standard to have a time zero, which can be very, very variant depending on what kind of experiment you're running. We have a way of actually describing our PET framing, which is very, very different from the existing MRI framing that was present in BIDS. We have a way of describing how to actually get the blood data adequately described in metadata standards in a data format, so you can actually reuse and understand how the experiment was done. And all of this is then done in a simple folder structure. Basically, you have a JSON file, which is just a structured text file that gives you some overall information about the experiment. Then you also have a file that describes a little bit the metadata for the image. Then we have actually our, in this case, 4D images, and we might have some blood metadata and some actual blood data available. And if it's possible, of course, and you have an MRI available, we also have the standard way of sharing the MRI and the meta information of the MRI there. So in that sense, the PET-BIDS standard was kind of a condensed and simplified version of how can we share data that can be reused by other PET researchers. And what do we then do with this data? Why do we want to share it somehow? And the standard right now in the neuroimaging community was the Open Neuro platform. It was the official report, or is the official repository of the BRAIN initiative, and it's part of the Amazon Public Datasets project. It has almost 1,000 public datasets by now with almost 40,000 participants. And you have 10 to 20 new datasets uploaded every month. You have about 1,000 plus downloads every month and 8,000 users that are actively engaging with the site every month as well. And what we then wanted to do is to make sure that the PET data gets into this embedding. So in the OpenNeuro PET project, which I'll detail a little bit more in a second, we actually worked on making PET come into OpenNeuro and make a special place for it. So if you now visit the OpenNeuro homepage, it actually has different landing pages for the modalities. And here we then want to follow the standard format, so the PET-BIDS format, and also the content that we arrived at that we want to share and need to share. And we want to actually follow the best practices that were defined in the guidelines paper. And we really want to kind of educate the community about these standards, but also get feedback, because basically BIDS has always been a community project, and also in OpenNeuro PET, we are really looking for input. And one of the final goals we have is actually, whereas in the lab that I'm from at the Neurobiology Research Unit at Riis Hospital, we have worked a lot with making average images of receptor density. For example, we have released serotonin atlases, also GABA atlas. Now, the idea is also to share these atlases publicly. We do that already now in our regular format, but to share them publicly in a standardized fashion, and maybe, if possible, also with the individual subject maps that they were averaged from, if we can get around with being allowed to share those. And if we share those average receptor density maps, they will not only be useful for the PET community, but they will also actually open the eyes of some people in the fMRI community. For example, if we need to define a fMRI region of interest, should we actually define it based on a certain receptor density instead of an anatomical region? So going back to really making function work together with function, so PET and fMRI, instead of just relying on structural information for fMRI analysis. And OpenNeuro PET status so far, I mean, we are getting started. We have about 9 public data sets only with about 20 participants now. But if you look at all of them, you can see quite a range. We have some data sets from the NIMH that have been uploaded from Bob Innitz's lab. We have data sets that are being uploaded from the Martinos Center. We're very grateful for that data set. We are also sharing some data from NRU, and the NRM PET Grand Challenge data set is also hosted there. This is our OpenNeuro PET project. We are a bunch of people from across the globe working together. We have a European side that also works at making GDPR-compatible data sharing possible for everyone. Here you can have a look at this publicneuro.github.io if you're interested in this. And otherwise, I wanted to make a special point out of here, since I have all of you in the room. We want to get in touch with you. You are the computational people. You are the actual people that do the kind of stuff that we do. You have the capabilities to actually convert data and to make a processing stream reproducible. So please check out our mission statement on the OpenNeuro PET homepage. Take a peek maybe at PET2BIDS, which is our open source converter. You can help in becoming part of the open source community, just as Chris has advertised, by basically becoming a contributor and testing the stuff. Does it work on your type of data? And we are going to, especially for the OpenKMI crowd, make online office hours on November 14th and 16th between 8 and 18 UTC. So we're not going to sit there for 10 hours, but we'd like you to basically send us an email to openneurpet@gmail.com, and we'll arrange a time between 8 and 18 UTC on November 14th or 16th. So that's about 10 days from now. And then we can help you, try out our tools. So thank you so much, and I'm open for questions.